Thanks so much for joining our Climate Connections event series and our Waste Management Edition, hosted by Entrepreneurship UBC and Foresight Canada. So my name is Shay Sinnott. I'm the Director of Programs for Accelerate from Anywhere with Foresight Canada, run in partnership with Social Innovation Canada, and I'm delighted to be your host and moderator for today. Let's start off. We've got a cozy group, 20 people, awesome. And if you could give me a wave, a sign of life, or an emoji reaction, if you know where to find that on the bottom of your screen. As a smaller group, we're excited for that because Climate Connections is really about facilitating structured conversation and engaging and being interactive with you. So you'll be able to mute and unmute, turn your video on or off. And we'll also invite you to use the chat as much as possible. So you're going to hear me prompt you to do that. So let us know if you have any questions. Astrid and Thomas from my team are in the background, and let's get going. So first up, I want to acknowledge the land and stewards of this land. So Foresight Canada works across what we call Canada. And so we honor the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. But I'm speaking to you from Vancouver on unceded Coast Salish territories. And so first prompt to use the chat. If you haven't already, if you want to say hi and where you're joining from, I imagine we have lots of folks in Vancouver and BC. If you know the Indigenous lands you're on, then bonus points. No worries, we won't judge your spelling. That'd be great to see you say hello in the chat. And to tie my acknowledgement into our topic of waste management for today, I remember years ago being in a circle of mostly Indigenous peoples and hearing an Indigenous woman talk about being really little and her mom teaching her, telling her a story, teaching her a lesson. She said something about throwing something away. So it's a common turn of phrase, right? We throw something away. And her mother taught her, there is no way. There's no such thing as a way. And so to tie it into our topic for today of waste management, innovation of waste management, I invite us to think about what that means, internalizing that as humans, and starting to act like it, and offer that as food for thought for today. So our purpose for our Climate Connections events, and want to honor, yes, Shannon Bard from Entrepreneurship UBC, hi Shannon, who can also expand upon this when we hear from her, is to showcase real world climate related industry challenges. So to provide a space for a structured conversation, as I said, so that solution seekers from our four panelists here today, and innovators from especially academia can come together and dig into these challenges together. So that's our purpose for today. This is our flow, and I'll come back to this to make sure we're all clear on where we're at. And to do that today, I'm going to start off with a quick round of intros. We have a fantastic panel of industry and government leaders, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves in the speaking order that they'll go in afterwards. So I'll call you out. And I'm inviting them to say who they are in their role, and then also what they're hoping for from today's event in 30 seconds or less. So first up, Chris Underwood, can you say hello and your hopes for today?
Hi, everyone. Pleasure to meet you. It's really nice to be here. Chris Underwood with Metro Vancouver. Now I'm the Division Manager of Solid Waste Planning, and have been with Metro since last February in this role. Prior to that, I was with the City of Vancouver for about 25 years. So I'm a bureaucrat and a waste nerd. And what I hope to get out of the session today, based on the pitch that I'll be giving, is some connections with folks who are interested in the area of work regarding carbon capture and utilization.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Perfect. Today's about connecting, so let's come back to that. Next up, Miguel Santos.
Hi everyone, my name is Miguel Santos. I'm the Sustainability, Innovation, and Public Affairs Specialist with Save On Foods. I've been in the role for about a year now. I come from a pretty crazy background of consulting and startups, so I bring a pretty crazy lens to a lot of these problems experienced in the retail and grocery sector. For today, I'm pretty excited to do some collaborative solutions design and just communicating problems and opportunities around that, because that's where everything starts. And looking forward to hear any questions and thoughts coming from this group today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Miguel. Thanks for being here. Next up, Tamas Weidner. Tamas, you want to say hi?
Hi, my name is Tamas Weidner. I'm Operations Manager here at the University of British Columbia for the Waste Management team. I work closely with a little over 20 staff, and we're responsible for the collection of all solid waste on campus. And I also work closely with some other stakeholders such as UBC Custodial, Sustainability, Student Housing, and Food Services. I've worked for the university for 29 years, 4 years in this particular role. And I'm hoping to walk away from this session to engage in some discussions and make some connections that may result in potential ideas on how to tackle my challenge.
Awesome, Tamas. Thank you. Thanks for being here. And last but not least, Carl, if you could say hi.
I can. In fact, Miguel and I are going to have to get together because I've done a lot of startup stuff and I like that attitude. I'm Carl Anderson, I'm Vice President of Pello Division at Recycle Smart Solutions, a North American-wide waste management broker. I spent the last 3.5 years designing and building the Pello system, a novel technology mix of custom IoT sensors and cloud technology. Boy, that sounds good, doesn't it?
It does.
Basically, we're deploying this one solution for a correction to the sustainability and waste management. We're stopping the pickup of empty and near empty front load bins. What I'm hoping to get out of this is actually probably a little wider than some others. I'm hoping people understand for the most part, the problems in the waste management industry have not been solved. And the industry is largely operating like it did for the last 40 years. It means it's ripe for ideas and initiatives to change the industry to support sustainability. And these guys are going to be talking about some of it. I've done some of it, but it's really a fascinating area for change. So that's what I'm after.
Absolutely. Thanks, Carl. Okay, what a great group. Round of applause. Thank you for being here. So I also want to honor Shannon Bard, who you're going to hear from in just a sec. I'm going to share a little bit about Foresight Canada, and then I'll flip it to you, Shannon. So Foresight Canada's big, bold mission is to enable Canada to become the first G7 country to reach net zero. We bring partners together across what we call the Helix 5, and we do that to launch, commercialize, and scale the clean technologies that we need to address today's most urgent climate challenges, like the one we're discussing today. This includes a range of programming. So I work on the acceleration team, acceleration programs. If we could flip forward, Tamas, as well as innovation challenges and research, attracting capital, engaging investors, doing a lot of matchmaking, export development, of course, and then also ecosystem building, of which this is a part. So that's us. We can share more about our work, and we'd love to answer any questions that you have if you're new to Foresight. And I'm going to flip it over to Shannon Bard, who's going to say a little bit more about both entrepreneurship at UBC and then also maybe the origin of the Climate Connections event series, since it was really created together.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Shay. So yes, this Climate Connection is a collaboration between Foresight and the entrepreneurship program at the University of British Columbia, which is part of the innovation research translation activities at the university. So the average timeline from invention to adoption in society for research is 30 years, and we don't have time to wait. So we're trying to do things differently, see if we can decrease that timeline down to 5 to 10 years. And one of the biggest areas we saw there was need was a better understanding of what the market demand is, and a better understanding of how to do technology, market matching, and customer discovery and access to customers for customer discovery conversations and explorations for the research ventures that we support, the scientists and engineers that are founding these new ventures to get climate solutions adopted. So I lead the Climate Venture Studio. I believe there's one more slide, Thomas. You can just move forward to that, which is a new program that we launched in 2020. The idea is to build community around climate solutions. We have a human health studio as well as a social impact studio, and there's a lot of overlap between those 3 studios. But the idea is we need to do something differently. Let's bring the resources from the business community and from the industry partners and potential customers together so that we can really accelerate adoption of climate solutions into society. And so the impetus of creating this forum was to be able to do these reverse pitches so that both early stage researchers and founders and companies have an opportunity to hear from potential customers what their burning issues are, and then for them to be able to pivot or readjust and have an opportunity to ask these questions. So that's the purpose of this forum. So I really encourage those of you in the audience to really take advantage of this chance to meet our panelists, to be active and engaged in the breakout rooms, and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. Okay, so we're going to get into it. So here's how this is going to go. We're going to hear from our 4 presenters back to back. This is our industry experts panel, and they will have these solution seekers will have about 3 to 5 minutes, we've said, to do your reverse pitch. So starting with their challenge, their problem. And then what we'll do is we'll invite the audience. If you have a burning question, we'll have time for one question each speaker as we go. And I'll invite you to share that in the chat. So if you have questions, pop them in the chat. And if we have time, we'll have time for one question per speaker. And then at the end, we'll open it up for 20 minutes overall for the group to pose questions for all of our speakers. So we'll have 20 minutes together at the end. After that, we're going to move to breakouts, but I'll share more about what that looks like then. Any questions from our speakers before we begin? Okay, first up, Chris Underwood. We'd love to hear from you.
All right. And I'm also going to introduce Manny Massa from Metro Vancouver. He's on my team, and he's available to help answer some of those tougher burning questions that I might not be able to answer. He's been looking into this subject for a while. So anyways, with that, this reverse pitch idea is about finding a solution for beneficially utilizing carbon emissions from Metro Vancouver's waste to energy facility. For some context, Metro Vancouver is a federation of 21 municipalities, one electoral area, one Treaty First Nations that have collaboratively planned for and deliver regional scale services to 2.7 million residents, or about 53% of the population of BC. An area of service provided by Metro Vancouver is solid waste management, and regional waste management system includes various recycling and waste centers, a waste energy facility, and a landfill owned and operated by the City of Vancouver. The diversion rate in the region is one of the highest in the world at 64%. But despite this success, there remains about 1 million tons of solid waste that requires disposal each year. And about 25% of this, or about 250,000 metric tons, is processed through a waste to energy facility that turns waste into electricity, which is enough to power about 16,000 homes a year, and also recovers about 7,000 tons of metal annually for recycling. Metro is also working with partners on the development of a district energy project whereby waste heat will be utilized to provide heat and hot water to about 30,000 homes. However, a problem with the waste energy facility, probably not surprisingly, is that about 1.1 tons of CO2 is emitted per ton of waste processed, or about 300,000 tons CO2 per year. A goal of Metro is to drive down GHG emissions and become climate neutral. And under Metro's Climate 2050 policy, a 45% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030 from 2010 levels is targeted, with an overall goal of being carbon neutral by 2050. So that said, with respect to the waste energy facility, we're therefore quite interested in determining the best option or suite of options for beneficially utilizing CO2 emissions from the facility if an investment was made into carbon capture systems. Our initial review of opportunities for reducing carbon emissions from waste to energy has shown us that carbon capture is not necessarily technology difficult, but the utilization of the carbon is the challenge. Sequestration options are also being studied, but there is a disparity between local emissions of CO2 in the Lower Mainland and the best available carbon sink locations in BC based on geological conditions. And they're typically located in the far northeast corner of the province, almost 2,000 kilometers away. So sequestration isn't necessarily the solution. Carbon utilization might be the solution. We understand utilization technologies exist, but to our understanding are challenged by lack of maturity and factors such as high CapEx and OpEx, scalability, feasible transportation storage systems, and reliable end markets. We're therefore looking at doing an in-depth study to better understand the constraints and opportunities, but our current impression is that the best solution may involve a combination of end uses with partnerships between government and industry. We therefore welcome the opportunity for researchers and technology innovators, investors, and market leaders to collaborate on a solution to this challenge facing Metro Vancouver.
Thanks, Chris. Stephen has a question, actually. I'm going to repeat it. I see it in the chat, and this was my reminder for the group. If you have questions for Chris, to post in the chat, maybe we'll have time. So instead of burning the waste, can you switch to pyrolysis or carbonization that would reduce or eliminate the CO2 emissions? Question from Stephen.
Well, I think that's a possibility for sure. It would require a significant investment, and there is some risks involved, of course, with these types of technologies such as pyrolysis. There's been challenges in the past, particularly at the sort of scale that we're looking at or that we would require in Vancouver, Metro Vancouver. But it's, you know, it is a technical alternative for sure.
Awesome. Thank you. Chime in if you have any other burning questions for Chris. Otherwise, we're going to move right along to Miguel. So you've got about 5 minutes for your reverse pitch, and then same goes. I'll invite a question from the group.
All right, thank you very much. Hi, Miguel here again. So a bit of a profile on the company. Save On Foods is Canada's largest Western-based grocery retailer with about 175 locations from Manitoba to BC and then up to Whitehorse. And our main objective, at least for my department, is how to figure out what zero waste conventional grocery retail looks like. And so the challenge is kind of nestled within that. And what exactly that is eliminating the need for conventional waste hauling from our stores while building the necessary processes to capture lost value from our current waste streams. Waste streams such as styrofoam, wax cardboard, soft plastics, black plastics, food waste, and inedible organic matter as well. So essentially, how can we turn waste management from a cost sink into a revenue stream by utilizing circular economy strategies and partnerships? That's kind of the main question here. Some pain points.
Can you speak up just a tiny bit, Miguel? And if you could just repeat that one question because it was very succinct.
Oh, really? Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah.
So
No, it's okay. Yeah.
Is this better now?
Yeah, great.
Okay. So essentially, how can we turn waste management from a cost sink into a revenue stream by utilizing circular economy strategies and partnerships? That's the main question here. Some of our pain points are dependency and cost of waste hauling and management of plastics, cardboard, and items deemed as garbage. Loss of potential revenue from the lack of diversion in sale or repurposing of these unused materials. There might be a lack of back of house systems and logistical capacity to manage and redirect these waste streams, such as many stores might have space constraints back of house to really manage these items appropriately. And of course, staff training and consistency in an industry where there's a lot of human turnover in the staff side of things. Some additional details are we are currently solving the problem by developing partnerships with companies who are utilizing post-consumer or industrial waste for circular goods and services. An example being we're diverting close to 90% of our food waste to charity farms and compost. We're also looking at and assessing various partnerships around diverting soft plastics to be utilized for composite lumber, which is a great example of a switch from a cost sink to revenue stream for a certain waste stream. So there are things in the works. I'm just kind of looking for any additional ideas and visions around these kind of opportunities. Definitely don't want to say no to anything. And of course, another big challenge nestled within this is soiled and dirty plastics. Wax cardboard is a big one that's hampering a lot of people in the retail space in terms of how best to utilize it. It is currently having to go directly to landfill. And of course, challenges around staff error when it comes to diversion of materials, such as finding really good peaches in a front loader bin where that could have been easily diverted to a charity for use that same day. So some human challenges, some logistical challenges, and just trying to essentially figure out how can we not ever send anything to landfill from a grocery store.
Thanks, Miguel. This is your chance to pose a question to Miguel if you wanted to chime in or if you wanted to share it in the chat. Otherwise, I might ask you a question. So I'm sure this might be the case that these are competitors, but I'm wondering, like, what are you hearing in the scene, like other organizations that are dealing with the same problem and other solutions that maybe are coming up from them? Just wanted to hear a little bit more about that kind of ecosystem.
Yeah, with grocery itself, I mean, for me, I'm nestled within so many different working groups. So is a very obvious example there. I think what everyone's really searching for are really symbiotic relationships with either cross-industrial or outside of the industry partnerships with NGOs or other industrial partners, even municipal governments, to figure out ways to redirect materials in a way that serves municipalities from a lighter burden on landfills to additional revenue streams across industry in terms of diversion of materials and allowing for various supply chains to be a little bit more risk averse, financially safe, and things of that nature. A lot of people are using the same partners because the circular economy is still in such an early stage. There are still very foundational partners using certain plastics for certain circularized goods, let's say, that a lot of people are being attracted to. Ideally, in the future, we have many more players utilizing many more waste streams, repurposed, reutilized goods and materials that allow for a bit more of a wider expanse of flexibility. But for now, there seems to be very central partners working together with a variety of partners, especially in the retail space, if that answers that.
Definitely. Yeah, thanks for sharing more. Okay, moving right along. Next up, keep on having to scroll up to see my order. Tamas Weidner, if you want to chime in with your reverse pitch.
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm with the University of British Columbia. I manage the waste management team. We collect all operational waste on campus, primarily from the academic buildings and from student housing and residences as well. All waste is all solid waste that we collect is transported off campus. We segregate it and transport it off campus to an external recycler, with the exception of one stream, which is food waste. Food waste or food scraps is the only stream that we process ourselves on campus here. We call it a closed loop collection and processing system, where food waste is collected and taken to our South Campus in-vessel composting facility, where it goes through a composting process and essentially turned into compost for reuse by our landscaping crews here on campus. We collect close to 700 tons of food waste a year from all our locations. We have roughly about 150 locations on campus that we collect food waste from. These locations vary from academic buildings to student residences, food outlets, cafeterias, and we even have a small portion of pickup locations from residential locations that are non-academic. So my challenge or topic for discussion is how can we reduce levels of contamination, primarily soft plastics, in our food scraps stream, and specifically in the student housing residences, which account for roughly about 12 pickup locations out of the 150 that I mentioned earlier. We're seeing roughly 35% of contamination rate in these 12 residential pickup locations versus the 5 to 10 contamination rates that we're seeing in all other pickup locations on campus, which are mostly academic, supervised food outlets, things like that. So it is fairly specific. I'm hoping to talk about solutions or ways to tackle this contamination rate we're seeing that are also cost effective for the university. We've had a lot of successes to date. And pursuing our waste reduction targets has required innovation, strategic partnerships, and even widespread community support. And UBC has been committed. We've had successes. We created recycling infrastructure on campus that is convenient for the community to use. We've implemented multi-stream recycling stations and replaced nearly all individual garbage cans, thus providing access to recycling in virtually all locations, indoor and outdoor on campus. We did a major expansion of our UBC organics waste collection points, so we've doubled our composting volume. We updated our signage to make sorting easy for the campus community. We implemented specialty recycling programs, and pilots have been expanded as well. Things like styrofoam pickups, soft plastics, recycling streams, single-use gloves, primarily for labs and custodial and amber glass, lab glass recycling programs. The university community has embraced our waste goals and our programs, and engagement and interest continues to increase among the faculty and staff and students as well. We're currently piloting a waste dumpster sensor program, which is underway. Carl is our partner on that. And it's essentially to improve data collection and collection efficiency on campus when it comes to waste. And we're also piloting compostable bags, where we're providing compostable bags to one of the student residences on campus. And so they would in turn use these bags to dispose of all their food waste. And hopefully we'll be seeing some positive results there. But at the end of the day, I think the university has done a lot of sort of conventional things to reduce contamination, particularly in residences. But I think we now need to start looking at out of the box ideas that would potentially help us battle this issue.
I recommend
Ross.
beer. Offer beer
As an incentive?
as an incentive.
Innovative, Carl.
We have tried that at our fraternities and
Oh my gosh.
it wasn't working well.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Somebody log that on and post it. A question from Stephen in the chat. So obviously this is a huge problem across the composting industry, Tamas. What do you do with the 30% of contaminated food waste?
So that's where resources come into play, and it is a cost to the university. So all food waste makes its way down to our compost facility, where my staff do visual inspections and record contamination rates. The 30% that I mentioned, they try to sort the best they can, but we're seeing such high contamination rates. The 30% is the average. I mean, some buildings we're seeing way higher than that, and we just don't have the resources and the time to manually sort through. And so essentially, this material then gets landfilled, which is an unfortunate thing.
Thanks for sharing more.
It gets diverted to the garbage stream.
Thanks, Ross. Moving along, last but not least, Carl,
There we
if you
go.
could share your pitch.
Sure. So just before I go on, Recycle Smart is what we call a waste broker. So we essentially work with companies to handle all of their waste, and the haulers is a separate issue. So we actually see a broad cross spectrum of the organics, the waste, the cardboard, you name it, which is why I sort of wanted to bring this up and why we've gone down at least one stream for how to do this. But sustainability is one of the key problems facing the waste management industry. We have too many trucks, too many types of containers, and too many containers, all with variable historical based operations. I do it this way. I've always done it this way. I'm going to continue to do it this way. It leads to excessive greenhouse gases, noise, and traffic from too many trucks servicing outdated business models. Added to this is frequent inadvertent contamination that Tamas just talked about, and making recyclables go to the landfill instead of being used. And really the waste industry is just where it was 40 years ago. It's like, I can pick up air and I get paid. I don't care how long I go. It isn't really sustainable. And that's part of what I'm looking at is like, how can people do more? It's a multivariable problem. We have household waste, which is handled differently than commercial waste and industrial waste. And they're all using different containers, subject to different regulations and handling. Chris, so one of the interesting things, I don't know if the other people are aware of this, I wasn't before getting into this. Even in Metro Vancouver, what Richmond accepts compared to what Vancouver accepts compared to what UBC can accept.
Yeah, good. It was nice.
We got an unmute there, Chris Tucker. Sorry to call you out. Thanks. And if folks can just be conscious of that. Carl, you're on a roll. No worries, Chris, but Carl, you're on a roll. Go for it.
Okay, I'll go back to it. Chris, like one of the things that I wasn't aware of is that there are different regulations, different capabilities, and different acceptances. Black plastic lids on a coffee cup. Richmond won't take them. I think Vancouver does. I'm back on here, but it's really interesting that all these things interact, and what happens is the industry, they throw it out. And it isn't really sustainable. So my task and what I'm interested in people is just think a little bit outside the box on what sustainability could look like. We did one thing where we've got the sensor that can tell how full a container is and signal it, so you don't have to empty containers. You don't have to drive around and pick it up. But there's other things like cities going to bid by area. So there's only a minimum number of suppliers of trucks in the area. I mean, right now you can have a downtown tower that has a different company for cardboard, a different company for the glass, different company for the waste. Like it's ridiculous, all these trucks going around. And then detecting actual waste overflows is one of the, it's still a big problem in our industry, totally. Stuff goes over the top and is spilling, and you know, they have to sit there and idle and pick it up, and it's just gross. And there's no solution that I've seen yet. Detecting actual fill measurement ideas to work across industries is another good one. Container types change. You have totes, you have 2 yards, you have 4 yards, you have roll on. There's all these things. There isn't really a sensor that works for totes right now. It's a pretty icky environment, so they don't work very long if they work. And then ways to affect public sorting and waste handling so that cross contamination doesn't occur. Just what Tamas was talking about, right? So are there better tools to you know, waste disposition and disposal training? Like, it isn't, most people, it isn't nowadays, I think, a problem of I don't want to try to do something. It's what the hell do I do? Pardon my language. What do I do? Because, you know, if I put this in here, I put the wrong plastic in the plastic, and now the plastic isn't usable. So it's really interesting. So my pitch to you guys is sort of, where are some of these things? Where can you look at this? Because it's certainly an industry, and as you see with the other panelists, you know, everybody's working on pieces. There's a lot of pieces to work on, and that's it. Oh, and I'm interested, by the way. I mean, because like I say, because we see the whole broad cross spectrum, because we're brokers and in between. So that's my interest.
Thanks, Carl. A question in the chat from Chris. So as the broker, how do you handle the different types of plastics, especially when they are mixed together in a single product?
Well, so within our industry and what we've seen, single stream, especially in plastics and so forth, it typically doesn't work. I mean, what it ends up being is that because this particular plastic can't be worked with that particular plastic, I know some of the new sorting houses, and some of them have where they can grind it up and they'll do it by part. I don't know over here whether it's actually done that much. I haven't heard of it that much in Vancouver. So I think my best answer would be, because we're all across North America, it depends on where we are and what we can actually do with that plastic.
Got it. Thanks, Chris. And Carl. Okay, excellent timing, speakers. We now have 25 minutes for questions for all of our speakers, so I'm opening it up for the full group. You are welcome to come off mute, or actually, let's do this. Raise your hand if you have a question you want to chime in by speaking. Otherwise, you're welcome to add your question in the chat and I can get to it. I'm going to open us up by asking our speakers, what questions do you have for each other? I'm sure there's something, especially if you want somebody to expand a little bit on what they covered, some connections you see to your own work. So I'll just give us a sec.
I can start with one for Miguel,
Great.
if I can. So one of the interesting things that we find, and I'm sure you're finding it as you talk to people, is its consistency. There's consistency of supply, and then a consistent value. So cardboard 2.5 years ago, you couldn't give it away, right? Now it's back up to being, wow, you know, $250, $300 a ton, right? And so how have you found when you're talking to people about that problem? I mean, because I understand the circular, but the circular has to continue, right?
Yeah, the markets for waste items or reusable, recyclable items and materials can certainly fluctuate, as you know better than most. For us, we've had a lot of, in a couple of years prior to me joining, I've been updated on all of the past working with waste haulers, and we're talking waste hauling markets down to the US and Asia, you know, fluctuations around who's able to take and who wants it, versus you wake up and then no one actually wants anything, and it costs more to take it there than to actually what it's actually worth on the market. Those fluctuations are hard at times to also predict, and they definitely have impacts in terms of being able to move your waste streams from stores, from distribution centers to your waste haulers. And we've had even situations in the last 4 to 6 months where a waste hauler decides that we're not going to take X item anymore, and now we have to figure out how to redirect that to someone else or where to store it, which can be problematic, especially with organic, let's say. So for me, I don't have a solution. I don't think we do at all. We just try and remain very transparent and communicate very regularly with waste haulers and keep an eye on markets and use them as well as a bit of consultants for us to understand where things might be headed. But as you know, I don't think there's a really clean fix here with that. especially in the economy right now, in the supply chain issues as well.
Other questions from speakers to speakers? Feeling quiet. So a question from Thomas in the chat, which I think gets at a bigger question around systems. So this is for Carl, but then I'm sure others have thoughts. Do you find the complexity in the waste industry is a big part of the problem? So different rules, regulations by regions, and then just generally a lack of public understanding, even though there's a desire to do something about it.
I think in my experience, it's a twofold problem. On one case, just as Miguel was talking, the waste hauler industry is very antiquated. They're no offense to anything in particular, but not really driven for sustainability, driven for I've made money and I'm making a lot of money, I can make it this way. So you add to that, then the complexity of where it's being hauled. And yeah, it's an interesting problem that isn't always easily solved. I mean, we work with a number of haulers, right? We have to with various places. So I think it is a problem. I don't think it's the primary problem. How's that as an answer? Because as long as we know what's going on, you can start. It's a problem with the public. I guarantee it's a problem with the public, just because how can you keep track of that stuff, right? But as far as us, as long as we know what it is, it's more a case of matching up to where it goes. But again, it's having an interest in not, or essentially going back to Miguel's stuff, how can you not take it anywhere, but give it to somebody so that they can use it? And Tamas with sort of how can you change these things down, right?
And just to add to that, actually, to the complexities in the waste hauling industry itself, when we are doing the financial analysis on what it looks like to divert material X from our current waste hauling services, we have to integrate a bump in charges that we might see from them as a result of essentially removing a large portion of their revenue from our waste hauling needs. So that's a great example of what's going on under the covers as well that we have to think about.
Any other comments from other speakers about this larger question? I'm going to go to a question in the chat from Matthew. So to what extent does improved waste stream supply chain transparency have a role to play? So are companies trying to make it more visible to customers where the waste goes? This could help with behavior change at segregation, but also help increasing demand/willingness to pay for solutions for products currently not recycled. I kind of heard you speaking about transparency before, Miguel, but yeah, to what extent does improved waste stream supply chain transparency have a role to play is the key question. Chris or Tamas? Maybe Chris.
I can briefly comment based on the knowledge I have. So I think it does play a role. Just because, and I can only speak for the university, our sustainability teams have always been very interested in knowing where our waste stream goes, and our statistics are based off of not just tonnages and quantities that we send to our recyclers, but also based off of a carbon footprint, and which includes where that waste then goes after that, whether it's being sorted, whether it's going to the landfill, whether there's effort being put into reuse, things like that. So having that transparency for the university is huge, and I do know it's something we've included in the process of when we're selecting the vendors that we take our recyclables to. Hopefully that answers it a little bit.
Thanks, Tomas. Feel free to jump in, others. I'm just trying to pause a lot to give space if people want to jump in. If not, I'll move along. Questions are rolling in.
Yeah,
go for it, Miguel.
Transparency can be very important when it comes to an education or awareness piece for the general public. I think transparency without storytelling, promotion, and education might not be as effective as one might hope. I know personally for me and a lot of people I speak to is once you know what's going on and you actually are invested somewhat in that issue, you have a pretty good chance of changing that behavior. But it's how do you actually have access to that information? Do you trust that information? Who's telling you that information? How regularly are you in touch with that? That's kind of my take on that. And of course, transparency across supply chains in any shape or form, be it seafood or textiles, crucial for that overall public perception, consumer trust, and this is no different.
And also begets like a greater capacity or ability to engage in human-centered design too, right? To address challenges. I know working a long time ago with the solid waste management team at the City of Toronto, and they did a lot of public engagement around engaging people and understanding why was the recycling system so contaminated. And then they found that, yeah, greater transparency around specific things like why is it that black plastic you can't or you couldn't 5 years ago recycle it in the City of Toronto. And that you could see, I was in this room full of like 70 residents, and it was like people were like, oh, I see, that's why, okay. So there was a greater understanding that didn't necessarily lead to greater change sometimes, but yeah. Lots of great questions. I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed. So speakers, maybe if you want to just check out the chat. Chris, there's a meaty question from Stephen there in the chat. If you could check that out, and then I'm going to come back to you. Looking at a question from Rory, I believe. So Rory's interested in the technical issues around the separation of waste streams and what makes that a challenge. And so the question is, what percentage of total waste can be incinerated for electricity generation with an eye towards scrubbing technology and reducing waste versus recycling? Question for our speakers. Chris, you came off mute.
Yeah, I'm thinking that was probably directed towards me.
I think so too.
Yeah, so of course, our goal is to divert as much as possible rather than send it for incineration. And then what is received for disposal is essentially beyond our control, other than the bans, disposal bans, which are in place at the regional level and which are enforced. And so it's very much mixed waste, and the composition of that waste is looked at every year. The details are made available, so that can be downloaded. Those reports can be downloaded on Metro Vancouver's website, looking at the overall composition of the waste. Generally speaking, though, it is comprised of about, just going by memory here, upwards of 40% organics, which is very high, of course, source separated organics, so food waste and yard trimmings. And that's despite all the effort that's been put into organic separation programs over the years. So that percentage has been brought down over the last 10 years significantly, but there's still about 40% of organics. Then there are things in there that are, of course, recyclable and should be recycled, but we're still seeing, upwards of, say, 20% paper, some of which is contaminated paper, so may not be recyclable, but theory is recyclable plastic. And of course, as one proportion of waste goes down or material type goes down or it goes up, there's a difference between our biogenic and anthropogenic emissions. And so those are treated somewhat differently. Manny, who is back on video, could answer some of the detailed questions if there are some. I don't quite understand.
Manny might want to jump in.
Yeah, but I didn't quite understand the rest of the question there. The technical issues around separation of waste streams that make this a challenge.
Okay.
So it's all it's burnable, and that's a really crude solution to the problem here. Of course, we're wanting this not to be sent for incineration, so we're having to deal with what doesn't get diverted, and it's a mixed, very much a mixed waste stream, I guess is the short answer.
Yeah, and perhaps I'll add in a couple words as well. So there were a few questions there. The first one was about the synthetic textiles, and so yeah, as Chris mentioned, Metro Vancouver does waste composition studies annually, and based on the most recent waste composition study, like synthetic textiles are approximately 3% of the waste composition, and then the other thing that I wanted to add was regarding the other question about transparency. And I'm not sure if folks here are aware, but actually the government of Canada is also working on a specific rules for strengthening recycling and composting of plastics through accurate labeling. And that consultation paper right now, it's open for feedback. And so I highly encourage anyone that's interested in that to check it out. I thought it was a very interesting consultation paper. And so the government is kind of working on that with regards to transparency, specifically for plastic packaging and some single-use items or short-lived items. And they're also hoping to address some labeling confusions with some compostable plastic products as well. And yeah, with regards to the other last question about the emissions. So yeah, I believe roughly half of those emissions from the waste to energy facility are like non-biogenic and half are biogenic. And so biogenic would be from I guess things like organics. Non-biogenic would be things like plastics. And yeah, yeah, I suppose that's about it.
Thanks, Manny, for chiming in and addressing a bunch of points. Miguel, you're so quick. I was asking for somebody to find that consultation paper and share it, so you can see that in the chat that Manny referenced. Please chime in if I missed any. Oh, there's one question I want to come back to, but please chime in if other speakers wanted to build on anything that's been noted. We'll take another, let's say like 5-7 minutes in the larger group, and then we'll break out into smaller groups.
Can I
Carl,
ask
so you come off mute.
generic question, which I find kind of interesting just from background? Given that plastics are now going down to nanoparticles and below and coming up in every food chain that we have, I personally, to me, that sounds like we really should be burning them. But I'll throw it open to the group. It's kind of a fascinating, I mean, in my experience, I'd heard nothing of it before. And then to watch it just gradually come up to where it's like everything through the blood-brain barrier, through everything. You kind of wonder, do you really want to compost that, right?
Mm.
Just a question. Anybody else noticed, heard, thought? Was I clear on what I'm talking about? Like the fact that plastics actually break down, but they actually don't ever go away?
There's no way. Manny?
Yeah, maybe I'll talk a little bit about this too. I guess there's definitely a lot of different thoughts and opinions about this subject, and it's yeah, there's a lot of considerations too. Of course, burning plastics releases CO2, and then we have the climate change problem. So
Yeah, and worse.
And yeah, so the government of Canada did release a science assessment that like under their precautionary approach, that's why they're tackling or have this zero plastic waste agenda to tackle microplastics and macroplastics that end up in the environment as litter. And yeah, definitely a lot of things to consider. Yeah.
I mean, maybe building on that point, we've touched on it a little bit, I think, but Carl asked in the chat a while back, so how will the single-use plastics ban change your issues or how you're addressing challenges for those of you for whom it's relevant?
I think for us, it just drops the amount, right? So it's not, I mean, it's good. In fact, I was just in France and you couldn't get a plastic anything, right? It was like wooden forks, wooden knives, cardboard. It was pretty amazing. And but from our particular, it's one less part of the stream because there still is plastics.
Mm-hmm. Chris?
Yeah, for our issue, unfortunately, it won't really have an impact. It has positive impacts in other ways, but from a CO2 emission perspective from a waste energy facility, it would be negligible. It's such a small quantity relative to other material types, and essentially when you remove that portion of the overall waste stream that's being burned, it would be taken up by other materials. You know, and that's saying all this is not. It's not suggesting that I don't support it at all. In fact, I've worked very hard to help put those regulations in place in the city of Vancouver. So you know, it's a real positive step forward in my opinion. But there's a lot of plastic packaging that isn't being covered by single-use bylaws locally.
We need more.
I could briefly comment that on that as well. UBC has been composting for roughly 12 years now in-house. We've been running our invisible composter, and the UBC Climate Action Plan does include making progress on banning single-use plastics on campus, food, beverage containers, and so on. We've already done that in all our food service outlets. So these are UBC run and managed outlets, and we've seen a huge reduction in plastics in our organic streams coming out of those locations. If you ask me, over 5 years ago, what was my biggest contamination in our food waste stream? It was single-use plastics. We used to see a lot of forks, knives, things like that in our organic streams. We no longer do. I don't think I've seen a fork or a knife in our stream in several years now. It's soft plastics, which is a different source. But that's what I can comment on that.
So I'm sensing some progress, you know,
A huge progress. Like I said,
but we need more.
Exactly. We need to expand that, not just single-use plastics, but soft plastics and other contaminants as well.
Cool. Thanks all. This is great. My mind's full of more questions and comments, but I think let's take one more question and then we should move to breakout rooms. So we'll be in 2 small rooms and you'll have more opportunity to talk and ask questions and make connections. So Thomas from my team reminded me of a question from Chris a while back that we didn't get to. So one type of plastic waste that hasn't been mentioned is clothing waste. Is this a pain point for speakers, basically, was the question. Textiles and clothing waste, polyester. Any comments from the group?
Well, a general comment, you know, from a regional perspective is that textiles is a massive problem in terms of disposal. You know, fast fashion, we've got a campaign dedicated to drawing attention to this issue. And we've been focused on this for some time to help raise awareness for people to think twice about, we call it think thrice about what they're purchasing with respect to clothing and other textiles. You know, there's in the Lower Mainland, there's a strong contingent of what are referred to as sorters and graders, but there is a real lack of local processing facilities to turn these, you know, wasted textiles back into usable products. They're typically shipped overseas at a great cost, financially and also to the environment. So it's a big issue.
So yes, a pain point. Any other comments from the group? Or last burning thoughts for the larger group before we break out into smaller ones? Okay, let's do it. So we're going to have 2 breakout rooms. Thank you, Astrid, you're so on it. And we're going to have 2 speakers in each and then a facilitator in each. So you're going to see a pop-up on your screen prompting you to join the room of your choosing based on who you'd like to dig deeper with. Okay, we're back.
We were in the middle of a discussion. Oh my
Oh,
God.
no.
The nerve of these people.
We were too. We were thinking with the smaller groups, maybe we end a little bit early. But did somebody get cut off mid-sentence and they really want to finish? Carl, do you want to finish?
Well, I think it was Stephen talking, but it's okay. We can talk about it offline. I don't have an exact number, but it is interesting. Like for instance, we are monitoring UBC, and depending on where that cardboard bin is, some of them get really whacked, right? And that maybe that comes back to this training, right? Like, my God, there's a blue bin, which is garbage, and there's a green bin, which is cardboard. Why are you throwing your black bag in the cardboard, right? It just doesn't make any sense at all. So yeah, I don't have an exact number.
Any other burning thoughts or comments since I cut you off a little bit early? Okay. We thought since it was a smaller group, and maybe this gives more time for people to connect and set up calls to follow up or send some emails, we would end just a little bit early. So thanks so much to our speakers, Carl, Chris, Miguel, Tamas. Really appreciate you taking the time. And yes, Astrid is popping some links in the chat. So this is how you can connect with each person. If we could copy that in the chat as well, if it's not already there for my team. Thank you to my team, Astrid and Thomas and Stephen, for bringing this event together. And of course, our partners in Shannon Bard at Entrepreneurship at UBC. This is an event series. And so as you can see, flipping forward, we have another one coming up, October 26th, our bio edition. And we invite you to register, tell your friends, tell your networks. And I think that is all. Did I miss anything, team? Okay, give me a sign of life and a wave. Thanks so much for coming out. Really appreciate you.